The hammer struck the wooden post with a crack that echoed down the dusty street. "Lot number 6, called the auctioneer, voice sharp as grit. One female, fit for house labor, debt to be repaid in full. Mara Dalton didn't lift her head. The sun was too bright, and the crowd's silence heavier than any chain around her wrists. She could feel their eyes, the whispers sliding over her skin like dry wind. "That's the one who lived," someone muttered. "Buried 100 men and walked out clean." The ground shimmered with heat. Somewhere behind the old saloon, a windmill creaked like it was mocking her. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Starting bid, $20. No one spoke. Even the flies seemed to wait. Mara's mind drifted, to the sound of the mine collapsing, the thunder underground, her father shouting her name before the earth swallowed it whole. She still heard it in her sleep, the crack of timbers, the choking dust, the screams turning to nothing. Now, here she was, sold for silence. A deep voice broke through. $10, heads turned. The man stepped out from the edge of the crowd, broad-shouldered, dust on his coat, hat shadowing his eyes. He didn't look at anyone, just at her. The auctioneer blinked. "You're offering less than starting price, Ryder." "Town don't seem eager," he said. His voice was low, calm, but there was a tremor buried in it, like a gun not yet fired. Mara felt it too. Something about that voice. It slid across memory like a half-forgotten tune. She couldn't place it, but her chest tightened. The sheriff spat into the dirt. "Hell, take her if you want." "Ain't nobody else bidding on the cursed one?" The hammer fell again. "Sold." Cale Ryder stepped forward, coins clinking into the tin bucket. He unhooked the chain from the post and held out his hand. Not roughly, not kindly either. Just a simple gesture. Mara didn't move at first. The air between them seemed to hum, full of things neither dared to name. Finally she rose, the iron cuffs scraping, and met his gaze. That was when he froze. For a single heartbeat, his eyes locked on the chain at her neck, a small brass compass hanging from it, scratched but still gleaming faintly. He knew that compass. The world seemed to narrow around the tiny glint of metal, the same one he'd seen years ago in the palm of a laughing miner, a man named Eli Dalton, just before signing the safety order that sealed the mine's fate. Cale's throat went dry. He forced his hand steady and led her away, boots crunching on the dry earth. They passed the townsfolk, who stepped back as if guilt might rub off. One boy pointed. "That's the ghost lady," he whispered. Cale didn't answer. He only kept walking, the sun behind them stretching their shadows long across the dirt road. Mara followed, silent but proud, her chin high despite the chain. The wagon waited by the hitching post, mule swishing its tail lazily. Cale helped her up, more out of reflex than intention, and climbed beside her. For a while they rode without words. The road out of Hollow Creek wound through red dust and dying sagebrush. The only sounds were the creak of the wheels and the distant moan of wind through the empty mine shafts. Mara finally spoke. Her voice was rough from disuse. "You didn't buy me out of kindness." He glanced at her, then back at the road. "Didn't say I did. Then why?" He let out a slow breath. "Maybe I owed something." She turned her face away, the setting sun catching the brass of the compass, painting gold against her collarbone. For a moment he almost reached for it, but didn't. As the wagon crested the ridge, the old mine lay below them, a black scar in the red earth. The wind carried a faint hollow sound, like ghosts whispering through broken beams. Neither spoke again. But inside both, the same thought coiled tight. Freedom comes with a price, and the story of who really owed whom had only just begun. The storm rolled in just after dusk, quick and mean, the kind that swallowed the sky whole. By the time they reached Cale Ryder's cabin, rain had turned the earth to clay and the mules were slipping on the trail. The old place stood at the edge of a dry ravine, one room, lean-to-roof, a lantern burning faint inside. Not much of a welcome, but it was shelter. Mara climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help. Her boots sank in the mud. The chain around her wrists clinked as she steadied herself. She hated that sound. It made her feel like the whispers in town had followed her here. Cale took the key from his coat pocket and unlocked the iron loop. The cuffs fell into his palm, cold and heavy. For a moment he just looked at them, thumb tracing the worn metal. Then he set them on the wagon rail. "You can keep your distance if you like," he said. "Ain't no one gonna bother you here." "I've heard that before," she murmured, brushing past him toward the door. Inside, the cabin smelled of rain-soaked wood and tobacco smoke. A kettle hissed over the small iron stove, steam rising slow and white. Cale struck a match, lit a lamp, and the room filled with a soft amber glow. Mara's eyes drifted over the walls, maps pinned crookedly, a rusted pickaxe in the corner, and above the hearth, a framed document, edges burned. Western Mining Authority, safety approval. Her breath caught for a second. The ink had blurred with age, but she could still read a name at the bottom, Cale Ryder. He noticed her staring. "Old work," he said quickly, hanging his coat. "Doesn't mean much now." "It meant something once," she replied. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. He looked away first. Cale poured water into 2 tin cups, added a pinch of coffee grounds. The smell filled the cabin. "You hungry?" "I can manage," she said, but her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. He didn't smile, just slid a cup her way. She took it, wrapping her hands around the heat, the silence between them stretching like rope. Outside, thunder grumbled, the rain lashing harder. Cale moved to close the shutters, then hesitated. "Wind gets mean up here," he said. "Best stay near the stove till it passes. I've lived through worse." "Maybe," he said, fastening the latch. "But you don't have to prove it tonight." She almost laughed at that. Almost. No one had spoken to her without scorn for months. The warmth in his tone unsettled her more than the cold ever could. When he turned away, she caught him glancing again at the compass around her neck. His eyes flickered like he'd seen a ghost. "Where'd you get that?" he asked quietly. Mara frowned, fingers brushing the worn brass. "My father's. Found it after the collapse." The air changed. Even the fire seemed to pause. Cale's jaw tensed. His hand gripped the back of a chair till the knuckles whitened. She didn't notice, at least not fully. She was lost in her own memory. The last time she'd seen her father standing by the mine entrance, that same compass glinting on his vest. She swallowed hard and looked at the man across from her, not knowing he carried the same picture burned into his guilt. Rain hammered the roof now, the sound filling the silence they couldn't break. Finally Cale spoke, voice low. "You can sleep by the stove. I'll keep watch outside." Mara looked toward the door, then back at him. "You think I'll run?" "No," he said, reaching for his coat. "I think you need to rest without someone watching you for once." She didn't answer. She just nodded, curling near the faint warmth of the stove as he stepped out into the storm. Through the window, she watched him walk into the rain, lantern swinging in his hand like a fading promise. And though she didn't know why, a strange calm settled over her, as if some part of her had finally found the man responsible for everything she'd lost, and didn't yet know what to do with him. Morning came soft and gray, like the world was still deciding whether it wanted to wake. Mara stirred to the smell of damp wood smoke and the low whistle of the kettle. Her back ached from sleeping near the stove, but it was the kind of ache that meant she'd made it through another night. For a moment she stayed still, eyes half open, watching the light creep through the cracks in the shutters. Cale was already up. He stood by the doorway, coat half-buttoned, hat in hand, steam rising from the tin mug between his fingers. Outside, the land spread wide and empty. Muddy fields, a sliver of creek catching the morning light. He noticed her moving. "Coffee's there," he said. "Ain't strong, but it's hot." She pulled the blanket tighter and sat up slowly. "That's more kindness than I'm used to." "Don't call it kindness," he said, setting his cup down. "Just habit." She looked at him, really looked. His face was worn but steady, the kind of face that had seen too much and said too little. There was a scar just under his chin, faint but deep enough to tell a story. She didn't ask. He wouldn't have told it anyway. By mid-morning, the rain had eased. Cale went out to mend the fence, and after a while Mara followed. She couldn't stand sitting idle. Work had always been her language. She found a shovel leaning against the barn, wiped the handle clean, and joined him without a word. They worked in silence, side by side. The earth was heavy and wet, but the rhythm of it, the lift, the drop, the scrape, brought something like peace. Every so often he'd glance at her, surprised by how easily she matched his pace. "You don't quit easy," he said finally. "I don't know how," she replied. It was the first time he almost smiled. When the sun climbed higher, they took shade by the fence post. Cale poured water from his canteen, handed it to her. She drank, then passed it back. Her eyes drifted to the horizon, where the old mine scarred the hills like a wound that would never heal. "You worked there, didn't you?" she asked softly. He didn't look at her. "A long time ago, before it fell." He hesitated, thumb tracing the canteen's rim. "Before it fell." Mara studied his face. There was something in his voice, a weight, a memory pressing against the edges of it. She almost asked more but stopped herself. "People in the West carried secrets like bullets. You didn't pull one out unless you meant to bleed." They headed back to the cabin as the sun dipped low, a golden haze settling over the valley. Inside, Cale lit the lamp while she stirred a pot of beans on the stove. The small sounds, the bubbling stew, the crackle of fire, the faint brush of wind, filled the room like a fragile truce. "You plan on staying out here alone forever?" she asked after a while. "Forever's a long word," he said. "That it is." He looked at her then, eyes catching the lamp's glow. "And you? Where would you go if you could?" She turned the spoon slowly. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one remembers my name." He nodded. "I know that place." They ate in silence, each lost in their own half-finished thoughts. When the plates were empty, she noticed his hands, rough, scarred, but careful, as he stacked the dishes. It struck her how gentle a man could be, even after breaking so much. Outside, night settled soft over the valley. The lamp flickered, throwing warm light across the wooden walls. Cale sat near the window, staring out at the stars beginning to show. Mara watched him, wondering what he saw out there. Ghosts or hope? Maybe both. For the first time since the auction, she felt something shift inside her. Not trust yet, not forgiveness, but the faint start of understanding. When he finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "The storm passed quicker than I thought." She nodded, her voice low. "Sometimes it just moves inside instead." He didn't answer, but the quiet between them was no longer empty. It was alive, like the earth after rain, holding its breath before something new begins to grow. The wind came early that morning, cold and restless, shaking the shutters like a hand warning of bad news. Cale Ryder stood by the barn door, rolling a cigarette he didn't light. His thoughts were heavier than the sky. Mara was inside, hanging laundry by the stove, humming something so soft it barely existed. For a month, they'd fallen into a rhythm. Silent mornings, long hours of work. The kind of peace that grows in the cracks of old pain. But peace in the West never lasts. He saw the rider before the dust even rose. Sheriff Lyle Haddon, coat flapping behind him, hat pulled low. The man dismounted slow, boots sinking in the dirt. "Mornin', Ryder." Cale's shoulders stiffened. "Sheriff, mind if I come in?" "Reckon you already are." The sheriff gave a thin smile and pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Got word from Carson City. Mining authority finally finished digging through them old records. Thought you'd want to see." Cale didn't reach for it, but the sheriff dropped the paper into his hand anyway. The seal was cracked, the ink official and cruel. Inspection report, Hollow Creek collapse. Filed under C. Ryder, approval signature final revision. Cale read it once. Then again. The words didn't change. He'd known this truth for years, but seeing it spelled out, black on white, made the blood drain from his face. When he looked up, Mara stood at the doorway, pale as the linen she'd been holding. Her eyes darted from the paper to his hand, then to his face. "What is that?" The sheriff tipped his hat. "Guess she's got a right to know. Your man here signed off that mine as safe the day before it went under. Killed her pa, if I remember right. And a fair number of others." Cale's jaw tightened. "That's enough." But the damage was done. Mara stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "Is it true?" He couldn't lie. Not to her. Yes. The room seemed to fold in on itself. Heat from the stove, dust motes in the air, the sound of fabric slipping from her hands. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Would it have changed anything?" he said quietly. It would have changed everything. The sheriff, satisfied with the wreckage he'd made, gave a small nod and left. His horse's hooves faded down the trail, leaving only the sound of wind against the boards. Mara turned away, one hand gripping the edge of the table. "You bought me to ease your conscience. I bought you because nobody else would. Don't you dare twist that into mercy," she snapped, eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. "You walked free while my father died choking on dust your pen allowed." He flinched at that. "You think I don't live with it?" Every damn night I see their faces, his most of all. Then maybe you should have left me where I was, she said, voice breaking. He took a step forward, but she raised her hand. Don't. The lamp flickered, shadows cutting sharp across the walls. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, You should go. Cale looked at her, really looked. The compass still hung at her throat, the same one he'd once admired in her father's hand. He wanted to say something, anything, but words were useless things against the kind of truth that cuts to the bone. He set his hat on, pulled his coat tight, and walked to the door. The storm outside had found its strength now, wind roaring through the valley. He paused on the threshold, the lamplight behind him framing his silhouette. I never meant for any of it, he said. I know, she replied softly. That's what makes it hurt worse. The door closed between them. Outside, rain began to fall, hard, cold, relentless, washing over his tracks as he disappeared into the dark. Inside, Mara stood still for a long time, the compass heavy against her chest, ticking faintly like a heartbeat that no longer knew who it belonged to. Spring came late to Hollow Creek, but it came all the same. The snow melted slow, revealing patches of stubborn green among the gray. The air still carried the scent of ash and iron, reminders of the mine fire that had nearly swallowed the valley 2 months before. Cale Ryder had been among the last pulled out. His hands were still wrapped in bandages. The skin beneath would never be the same. He didn't mind. Burns were easier to live with than guilt. He'd gone back into that mine because he couldn't live another day hiding from what he'd done. He hadn't gone to be forgiven. He'd gone to pay a debt. But the strangest thing about debt, he'd learned, was that sometimes payment came from the ones who owed you nothing. He hadn't seen Mara Dalton since that storm-torn night she'd told him to go. Yet every dawn he found himself glancing toward the old cabin on the ridge, half expecting smoke to rise from its chimney again. That morning, it finally did. He rode up slow, the horse's hooves crunching over the thawing earth. The sky was wide and clear, the kind of blue that looked almost new. When he reached the fence, she was there, sleeves rolled up, hair loose, planting something small in the cold soil. She looked up at the sound of his horse and froze, not in fear, but in thought. You're a hard man to bury, she said finally. Guess I didn't stay down long enough, he answered, voice rough but steady. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She wiped her hands on her skirt, studying him like someone seeing a ghost that had learned how to breathe again. They said you saved 6 men down there. He looked past her, toward the hills where the mine still smoldered. Didn't count. I did, she said softly. For a while neither spoke. The wind moved between them, gentle this time, carrying the scent of turned earth and wood smoke. Finally he dismounted, walking toward her with careful steps. I came to say I'm leaving, he said. Heading east. Figure there's other places that need fixing. Her eyes didn't waver. And you thought you'd come say goodbye? I thought maybe you'd want your compass back. He reached into his coat and held it out, the same brass compass that had once hung around her neck. The glass was cracked now, its edges blackened from the fire, but it still pointed true. She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his. You kept it. Couldn't throw it away. It's the only thing that ever pointed me right. The air between them thickened with all the words they'd never managed to say. I used to think you took everything from me. She whispered, my father, my name, my peace. She looked down at the compass, its needle trembling faintly. But maybe you just carried the weight I wasn't ready to face. He swallowed hard. You don't owe me forgiveness, Mara. Maybe not, she said. But I can choose it anyway. He looked at her then, really looked, the strength in her stance, the calm in her eyes. Something inside him eased, like a wound that finally stopped fighting to stay open. From inside the cabin came a soft voice, a child's, barely more than a whisper. Mara turned. A little boy stepped into the doorway, clutching a wooden toy horse. His hair was pale gold, his eyes curious but unafraid. Cale blinked. Yours? Mara smiled faintly. My brother's son. He made it out of the fire. Been raising him since. The boy waved shyly, and Cale's chest tightened with something quiet and unfamiliar. Mara knelt beside the child, her hand resting on his shoulder. He's got the same look my father used to wear, stubborn and kind. Thought maybe he should grow up seeing better things than grief. Cale nodded, eyes wet despite himself. You did that. For the first time in years. He smiled, not out of relief but out of peace. The wind shifted, lifting the scent of fresh soil and the sound of a bird somewhere up the hill. Mara rose, the compass gleaming faintly in her palm. You don't have to leave, you know, she said. The land's big enough for both of us, and the boy could use someone who knows how to fix fences. Cale met her gaze. There was no forgiveness spoken, but there didn't need to be. It was already there, in the earth, in the light, in the quiet between their breaths. He took off his hat, smiled small. Then I'll stay a while. The boy ran forward laughing, and the sound carried through the valley, pure, bright, alive. The wind died down. The compass needle steadied, and for the first time since the earth caved in, Hollow Creek felt like home again.